This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. Today's episode is a bit of a celebration. The first young adult adoptee anthology of short stories, When We Become Ours, releases on October 24th, 2023. The first of its kind, edited by Shannon, Gibney, and Nicole Chung, with 15 adoptee authors, is cause for celebration. Congratulations to all the contributing authors. We're first going to hear an interview with an emerging author, Stefany Valentine, who shares her story of being adopted at age 12 while her biological father had a terminal illness. She's the first step-parent adoptee we've had on the show, and I think you'll find it fascinating as we talk about the lack of consent to her adoption, the cultural losses Stefany suffered, and how it wasn't until her mid-20s that she realized her biological mother had been removed from her birth certificate. Next, we're going to hear from 5 more contributing authors who share about their stories in the collection and what it's meant for them to be a part of the project. I could have done a whole season interviewing all of these amazing folks. I'm sure we'll hear from more of them in the future. Before we get started, I want to personally invite you to join our Patreon adoptee community today over on adopteeson.com/community, which helps support you and also the show to support more adoptees around the world. We wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Stefany Valentine. Welcome, Stefany.
Hello. Hi. I can't believe I'm here able to talk to you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited too. I may have binged too much of your gorgeous Instagram and TikTok.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I know folks are going to go check you out after we talk. So why don't you start and share some of your story with us?
You know, when I was born, I didn't plan on being adopted. I didn't really plan on being born, but here we are. So it's a bit of a lengthy story. I'm going to try to give you the Spark Notes version of it. My dad, who was a Mormon missionary, went to Taiwan, met my mom. They decided to have kids. Ta-da. Now you got this half Taiwanese, half white girly. And so I grew up in Taiwan, and then they got divorced. And so I was kind of like cut off from my heritage that way. And then my dad got married. And then my dad got diagnosed with colon cancer. Homeboy died. And then I got legally adopted by my stepmother when I was 12. So from that point on, my biological mother had absolutely no ties to me. I don't even know how to find her, even if I wanted to. And now I am a 30-year-old author. My contribution to When We Become Ours is a short story about Sora. She is kind of an analogy of my adoption story. So when I was adopted to my stepmother, she's a white woman. Her kids are Korean, but she speaks Korean, cooks Korean, all of that stuff. So I grew up around a lot of Korean influence. And this analogy that I have in my short story is about a girl who was born on the moon, who gets raised by parents who live in these colonies that orbit the Earth. And the analogy is, oh, well, you're both from outer space. Like, that should be close enough, right? But, for me, being a Taiwanese adoptee raised in a Korean household, like, there was definitely some overlap in similarities because they're both East Asian. But I still truly missed out on so much of being Taiwanese as a result of being adopted.
A lot of folks that we have talked to on the show before are adoptees who were adopted as infants in close adoption. We've talked to some adoptees who've experienced an open adoption. We've talked to adoptees who were in foster care for short or long periods of time and then were adopted. I don't recall having a step parent adoptee on the show before.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
I think it's really neat that in When We Become Ours, this first YA Adoptee Anthology that we're sort of celebrating today, that your story is represented as well. Can you talk to me a little bit about when you realize, and this is going to sound a little bit silly of a question, because of course there's trauma involved when your parent dies. I'm very sorry for the loss of your father, but can you describe, like, when did you realize that there was such a thing as adoption trauma? And is it weird that now legally your bio mom is not on your birth certificate? It is your stepmom. Those kinds of things. When did that realization happen for you?
I'd love to just like back up just a little bit and talk a little bit about like the legal adoption process, if you're okay with that, because there is something that comes to mind specifically for that, and that is that when I was legally adopted, I was 12 years old. And at that time, I remember there never being a discussion of consent. Is this really what I wanted? And it sucks because, like, as a kid, you don't really have the full picture. You have to trust in what your parents decide to do. And I understand that, like, in that specific situation, I grew up with 9 siblings, so I've got 4 biological Taiwanese siblings. I got 4 Korean siblings, and so it's just a chaotic situation where my dad is dying of colon cancer, and now, like, he's like, hey, I don't want you, my biological kids, to have ties to your Taiwanese side. You're going to be adopted to her because I'm your dad, and this is what I say you're going to do. And I understand that his back was in a corner and her back was in a corner, and then as a result, all of his kids had our back in a corner. But still, where was the consent? I was never educated on what that meant. And if I had been told, hey, you're never gonna, your mom isn't going to be on your birth certificate anymore, like, I would have said, I don't want to be adopted. But it happened, and here we are today. Like, the moment that I realized, and so like, growing up, we grew up in a Mormon household, right? And I love talking about religious trauma as well, because religious trauma and adoptee trauma, I feel like they go hand in hand so much, because in terms of religious trauma, I feel like there's so much kind of propaganda, or like you get like this indoctrination, you have this like save a life mentality, right? And like with the adoption narrative, it's you're saving a life with a child. So they kind of go hand in hand. And when you realize, like, oh my gosh, like, my whole life was kind of a lie, you kind of have that same sort of dissonance that are very, very similar. So I feel like for me, when I became an adult, and this is honestly so embarrassing, but I was in my late 20s when I realized, wow, I have a lot to unpackage with my adoption trauma. And wow, I have a lot to unpackage with my religious deconstruction as well. And it only started because I got on TikTok and someone happened to be talking about their adoption trauma. I didn't even realize that was a thing until someone was like, yeah, I was told that I should be happy that I was adopted, but I was never actually happy. And I was like, mind blown, because I had always been told that I should be happy. Like, I should be grateful. I should be grateful that my stepmother adopted me because no one else would have wanted me. And I always felt deep down that wasn't true. So being able to hear someone else literally say the words that I've been thinking out loud, it meant the world to me. And so now I feel like I'm such a huge advocate of like sharing stories, because 1, I mean, I'm an author. That's what I do, share stories. And 2, there is so much power in seeing your experiences handled by someone else, because now I'm not alone. I'm not alone in feeling this way. I'm not this alien. I'm not this freak. I'm not this like weirdo who doesn't fit the mold of what society thinks that I should be. There's someone else who literally knows what I'm talking about. And I get to use minimum words when explaining it because they just get it.
You had a lot of feelings when you were talking about your birth certificate. When your father was alive, did he maintain any connection for you with your mother?
I feel like my biological mother, she made home videos and stuff, but I don't know what happened to those home videos. She took a bunch of pictures, and to this day, I feel so grateful because I have a photo album of like me from ages like I believe 1, 2, and 3, up to 3 years old. I have photo albums with like my first days in pre-K, my first years with her. I swear I'm gonna cry, but like I have one picture of me with my biological mother. I know that there's so many adoptees who don't even have that. I feel so grateful to have that, but at the same time, like, it sucks that that's the only one that I have. It's tough. I think the reason why I'm so emotional is because like I'm still new, I guess, to my adoption trauma. And to this day, I haven't fully, it's kind of like a pimple. Like I haven't popped this pimple. Like there's still some juicy stuff in there. And like these are the emotions coming out. I haven't had a platform to like fully purge all of these emotions. And so they just keep coming out like this.
We do lots of crying here, so don't feel like you gotta like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I empathize so much with that, and my experience is very different. I was adopted as an infant, and I too have one photo with my biological mother, and it's over there, but on my wall you can't see it. But it's when she was 38 and I was 22. And
wow. Yeah.
So it was I just have this one thing. And for a while, I didn't know where that picture was. And when I found it, it was like having a reunion all over again.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah, because it's like you have these faint memories of that, and you're like, in a sense, did I dream it or is it even real? And then when you see it, when you see that picture in your hands, you're like, oh, wow, it really did happen. And it's like, it awakens things within you that you didn't realize were lost.
You mentioned growing up with Korean influence. How have you been reconnecting with your Taiwan culture as an adult?
I feel like one thing that haunts me the most is the fact that Mandarin was my first language and I don't remember a single word. Like the only thing I remember, because I remember going to school in Taiwan, is I know how to count to 10. I know how to count to 10 in Mandarin, and that's about it. And it was very empowering. During lockdown in 2020, I was like, you know what? It's about time. It's about time I start like reclaiming my culture and my heritage, because I miss it. I've always missed it. So I started relearning Mandarin, got some tutors, and the most useful and beneficial thing for me has been using an app, because I get to go at my own pace and I get to like squeeze in like a 3-minute lesson here, a 10-minute lesson there, or whatever. But the coolest part, I would say, is that when I started relearning Mandarin, I realized that like parts of my mouth, the muscle memory, my tongue, my lips, my throat, it can make those sounds. And it was so like validating to, like, I never would have even noticed that my muscles still remembered Taiwan, even if my brain didn't. Because I had that experience, I put it into a young adult novel, and that was the book that landed in my agent. And then a couple of years after that, it landed in a book deal. So, and I'm grateful that I'm able to combine so many aspects of my life and put it into literature, because like I said, like there's so much power to sharing stories, sharing the authenticity of those stories, because that's how we see ourselves in the world, is that authenticity. And it helps us to not feel so alone. So I love that.
Absolutely. It's so true. And it's interesting that on TikTok is where you first heard from other adoptees. I want to just go back one more time to this idea of adoption trauma. I see it as sort of different pieces, right? There's family separation trauma, right? You're disconnected from your biological mom, your father dies, you are losing those connections. And then there's this other piece of the adoption where you've got this legal severing of identity and then this societal expectation of gratitude, and then whatever we're getting from our family that we're placed into. So do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, so because I was 12 years old, I remember going to court. So this is like, I guess a funny story is, so there's nine of us kids, right? My dad's like yellow, jaundice, dying of colon cancer. You can see it in his skin, right? And there's my white mom, blonde hair, blue eyed. And then all of us little dark haired Asian kids, right? And we're all going through this courthouse. My youngest brother, he happened to have a tape measure with him, one of those ones where you pull out and they snap back, because he's a little kid and he just likes toys, right? So all of us were going through the metal detector, like one by one, and it gets to my youngest brother, and and we're all scared because we're like, what's going on? Like we know we look out of place here. Like people keep looking at us, we keep looking at them, and we just keep walking. And the metal detector goes off for my brother, and he's like, I don't even remember how old he is at the time, maybe 6 to 8 years old or something, super young. And he's like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And so all of us, we're all freaking out because like, that's our baby brother. And they're like, do you have a weapon on you? Like asking it to a child, right? And so he pulls out this little tape measure thing, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, you can't take that with you because it's dangerous. And all of us were thinking like, okay, like I know we're young, I know we're kids, but like, how is that dangerous? So anyway, we go there, we go into the courtroom, and I remember the judge literally just taking a look at us and being like, yep, this is final. You're legally adopted. And that was it. And like, so all of this buildup, all of this like fear, this trauma, we didn't even understand what was going on, and lack of consent. Again, like I didn't want this. Looking back in retrospect and in the moment, I knew for a fact I didn't want this. And a part of me was always wondering, why couldn't I just go back to Taiwan? But nobody asked me. We do that, finalize. And then it wasn't until I was looking at my birth certificate in my mid to late 20s that I was like, hold on a second. Where's my biological mother's name? And that was the moment that I realized in my late 20s, after all of this is like how little I was educated on the adoption process as I was going through it. It was just, here you go. We're just going to send you through it. It wasn't until I was like, in my adulthood that I was looking at my birth certificate. I was like, hold on a sec. There's no way. I look nothing like this lady. There's no way my stepmother is my biological mother, and yet her name is on my birth certificate. It was very traumatic and kind of silly, I guess, how the whole process went down. But I'll never forget it. And I honestly haven't shared that story out loud this is probably the first time I've ever had the opportunity to share that experience out loud, because like, this is how little like I get to talk about my adoption trauma. And I feel like that's why I have so much to purge, so much to exhale, because it's a lot. It's a lot I've lived with this like since my childhood into my teen years, and now into my adulthood. I'm still learning how I feel about it and how it's still affecting me to this day. There was a time in my life when I don't know what the word for it is, but I'm going to refer to it as like internalized adoptee trauma, where people will be like, well, don't you miss your biological mom? But like, I've been told time and time again that I should be happy that I was adopted. And so even though as a kid I had opportunities to talk about it, I had that kind of like indoctrination ingrained into me so much that I was always like, no, I really am grateful to be adopted. Like I would vocalize it, but deep down, I wasn't, So that's the only way I can express it. But like growing up, like I kind of had that internalized adoption trauma where I fed into that harmful narrative of like, adoption is good, adoption saves lives, like this is great for kids. I fed into that narrative. And now that like I've grown up and I'm able to have that emotional competence, have the therapy that I need to put words to my feelings and everything. And of course, to have the validation of like an entire community of people who have gone through what I've gone through. I'm able to be on the other side of it, where it's like, hey, I am able to see that sort of like internalized adoption trauma in the people around me, and even in my own siblings at times, because it's such a difficult, emotionally exhausting thing to undergo and to unpackage. Like you have to let go of so much of your past, and you have to really sit with that discomfort of like, this is so messed up. And then you get through it. And now you're able to like talk about it on platforms like this and share stories so that other adoptees like don't have to feel alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about some of your loves, which is reading and writing. I know there's just this lack of authentic adoptee representation in literature. We've talked about that before on the podcast. we're treated as a trope. We're the plot twist. We're the secret murderer revealed at the end. I mean, all the like tropey things.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So like growing up, like let's take Harry Potter, for example. That's our classic adoptee, right? But oftentimes in literature, you see the adoptee trope because it is a trope, unfortunately, in publishing, even though it's literally like something that needs to be handled with delicacy and care. But it's used so that one gives immediate sympathy to the reader. So like, oh, this poor adoptee doesn't know who he is, whatever. Number two, they always pair the adoptee to the orphan thing. So like, oh, not only is he going to be adopted into this household, but he's orphan, doesn't have his parents. Oh man, poor kid. You, the reader, you better sympathize with this because like me, the author, I don't want to go into the emotional baggage that comes with the trauma of losing both of your parents at a young age. And it gets really frustrating. And it's because like as a writer, I see through it. Like not only do I see it as a reader perspective, but I see it from the craft perspective where it's like, man, minimum effort was taken. And yet the funny part is the adoption trauma is the character development. And I don't want to call out like every single author who's ever attempted to write an orphan or an adoptee, because there are certain like nuances that come into play. For instance, different genres, like what age group you're catering to, and just how much trauma do you get to discuss per age group. And then another thing too is like, what does your editor want? So that's a whole other ball game that gets added into the equation. But to me, as a writer, I often see that the adoption trope is used so that as an excuse for lack of character development and to get immediate sympathy from the audience. And it sucks because like that is like the character development, that like exploring that adoption trauma, exploring being an orphan as a kid, that is the character development. There is so much internal conflict and internal turmoil and like external motivations that you can pull from this void that happens when you are severed from your parents. I feel like maybe because it's been done time and time and time again and hasn't been explored in depth, that unfortunately people see it in literature and they're like, oh, sure, I can use that in my story. And another thing that I feel like I see too is a lot of the time the orphan / adoptee trope is very prominent within like sci-fi, fantasy, the speculative stuff. And from a craft perspective, a lot of speculative fiction tends to be about the outside, the world building, the politics, the magical elements, how the spaceships go from point A to point Z. It's very, very external. And so it takes away from the character's internal exploration of like my adoption trauma or the character's orphan trauma. In a sense, I guess you could say that the genre at play takes away from the author's ability to discover and unpackage a lot of that. But that said, like with the character who has had a lot of that internal trauma, a character's motivation comes from within. And so at the end of the day, I feel like if a character has this like true adoption trauma, like part of their motivation is always going to be like, I just want to know who I am. That can be such a powerful driving force that nobody, like it's just sitting there. It's this untapped potential in literature. And it's wild to me from like now that I've had a chance to like really process and unpackage my adoption trauma, how so many authors don't see that and yet they continue to use the adoptee orphan trope to just give you a generic character that's been done time and time and time again.
What do you think about, I'm going to call it the ethics of authors writing characters that are adoptees without checking in with adoptees? There's a couple of very famous books, one in particular, I'm not going to name names, but the author has been quoted in several sources. We did a bit of a deep dive on this on Patreon a long time ago. And the author said, Oh, yes. I researched extensively. I talked to adoptive parents. I talked to birth parents. I talked to social workers, lawyers who work in adoption. She listed the whole list of people she researched, but did not talk to an adopted person.
Yeah. I feel like you and I, we know, we see the elephant in the room, right? Like, because that's the thing. That's the thing with the adoption narrative is it's so much about how adoption is ethical, how great it is, how much you're saving lives and you're saving babies. But then when you actually ask the adoptees, we're like, it ain't sunshine and rainbows, okay? Like our origin story is that we have no origin story. Like that's the trauma. Like that in itself needs to be handled with care and completely gets overlooked. I feel, and I'm so grateful for platforms like your podcast and When We Become Ours, and like the whole storm of adoptees coming forward and like sharing our experiences. I am so grateful for this movement that is coming because I feel like a lot of publishing, because publishing is such an old, storytelling is probably the oldest art form in human society across all cultures, yet we're still uncovering new ways to become better storytellers. And one of the ways that we do become better storytellers is to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to be human, because as we develop and as we evolve as in a society, like we are capable of picking up on these subtle details and these nuances, and they need to be examined for the sake of art and for the sake of humanity, explored very carefully and in publishing specifically. If not, then we risk falling into the same cycle, which is like this underdeveloped storytelling that we tend to see over and over again. And not only that, but it continues to perpetuate these harmful stereotypes and the harmful narrative that is like the adoption industry. I'm just grateful for people who are speaking out about it and speaking up too and sharing their stories.
Well, should we talk about it? Let's go to recommended resources When We Become Ours. It's so exciting to see it in the world. I don't know if regular listeners will remember, but I talked to Nicole Chung a number of years ago, and she was talking about, oh my gosh, one of the things I really want to do is help publish an adoptee anthology. And I recently got to talk to her again, and we're like, let's celebrate because it's here, it's coming out. I'm so impressed by the collection that Nicole and Shannon Gibney have put together. The authors that you are listed among, 15 authors, some of them are best-selling authors, some of them are new up-and-comers, and I just talk about own voices. Like this is it.
Oh my goodness. And like, okay, so I haven't read the whole thing quite yet, but during the developmental processes, I was kind of able to take sneak peeks at some of the other stories, and I'm still waiting for my hardcover to come in and everything. But I read this one.
You'll have it in your hands, Stefany. By the time this comes out.
Yeah. Yes. So the very, very first story in this anthology is one called Cora and Benji's Great Escape. And I swear within the first page of reading it, I was in tears. Like I was laughing, I was crying, I was angry. And I was like, man, this is a whole other genre, I guess, or this whole other aspect of adoption trauma that I need to unpackage still. And so basically it follows the protagonist, I believe, is Cora. She's a Black adoptee, and her mother is white, and her mother is kind of like one of those momfluencers who's like hashtag salt and pepper family because, the mom is the salt and the pepper is the kid, And I feel like as adoptees hearing this, like especially transracial adoptees, like all of us are like, ooh, like we've got that cringe, right? So I remember reading this and I was like, oh, like the cringe is so real. But then like how this mother just kind of like, I don't know if this is the right word for it, but like kind of fetishizes or like, what's the word I'm thinking of? Exploits, how the mother exploits her children. And I remember this one time in my childhood, because there's 9 of us, right, in this adopted family, there's 9 siblings. At one point, 8 of the 9, we were in elementary school. And my mother, none of us wanted to do this talent show, but my adopted mother was like, hey, all of you guys are going to wear these shirts. They're going to say, we are the Valentine family, because like let's be honest, like Valentine is a pretty cool last name. And then the fact that there's like 9 of us total, like it's pretty eye-catching. None of us wanted to get on stage and dance at this talent show, and yet she forced us to like go up there and dance and everything. And I was like, oh my God, like I can't unsee it now. Like, Mom, what were you thinking? But at the same time, though, it's like, yeah, I get it, Mom. Like, you were doing the best. You were doing what you could with what you had. And like, we were all kind of in a pickle. But man, like reading that story and just like the whole hashtag salt and pepper family, I was like, oh, I feel so seen. I've been there. Oh, I've done that. The cringe is real. And she captures everything about that experience so well. Oh man, it was beautiful, beautiful story.
That's so good. We love Mariama. That story. Literally, when I got to the salt and pepper line, Stefany.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I emailed. I think I emailed Nicole or Shannon. I can't remember which one, because I was like, "That's it." Because I don't know. We're not going to say the name, but everybody who knows. There is a momfluencer who has called her platform this thing, not salt and pepper, but related. And it's so gross. It's so gross. And I think fetishization is a great word for it, actually. And I think it's accurate because we don't talk about people of color as food items. Thank you.
I know, right? Oh, it's just a whole other level of cringe. But like, I hate that I love it so much. Like, I hate that I feel this way, but I love that I feel this way because it's so true. And like, that level of nuance, that level of detail, that level of care can only be written by someone who has firsthand experienced that. And that is what I love about this anthology. That is what I love about talking about adoption trauma and being an author who writes adoptee characters and gets to explore all of this, because there's so much intersectionality and there's so much nuance. And the only way to tell it with this much raw human emotion is if you have lived it. And I feel so honored to even be a part of an anthology like this, because like this anthology is gonna make so many people feel seen. It's gonna help kickstart so many healing journeys.
Yes. For young people.
Yeah.
You know, one of the questions I asked, we're going to hear from a couple of your fellow authors once we wrap up our conversation. But one of the questions I asked was like, what would it have meant to you, you know, to have something like this to read when you were a young person, and how meaningful that would have been. So I just think it's so special. I love that it's short stories.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you a little bit about why you chose sci-fi as your genre of choice. But I think there's something about short stories, well, for all of us, but I'm thinking especially for your target, for the young people, that when you read a short story, you can have this, you know, immediate emotional reaction in a short period of time. And often those things unlock something for us. Often those are like the memorable story that you will think back to. And to think there's so many of those in this book altogether, like it's just really special. Okay, why sci-fi?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So one of the reasons why I chose to write my story in sci-fi was because there are so much of the adoptee trope that we see is in speculative fiction, sci-fi fantasy. And it never gets explored internally because we're spending so much time building the world, building the conflict, building the plot. And these are all external things. But what if we had a speculative fiction story with an adoptee protagonist, and that was the protagonist's motivation, was the adoption? Like, it starts from within and it bleeds into her world. And this is why I wanted to specifically use this analogy of, well, the protagonist is an extraterrestrial. She's not like from Earth, like she's a lunar creature, like a lunar alien or whatever, if you want to call it that. But so are her parents. They're both extraterrestrial, but one of them lives on the moon, and the other one, her parents exist, or they come from colonies that orbit the Earth's atmosphere. So that was the analogy I wanted to use for my adoptee experience with, being a Taiwanese girl adopted into a Korean household. Like, yes, we're both extraterrestrial. We're not the same. And I feel like specifically with so much racism surrounding East Asian countries, a lot of the narrative is, oh, well, you guys look the same, or you guys speak the same, or you guys eat the same. No, we don't. Like, it's 2023. Like, no, we don't. And I really wanted to encapsulate how, like, yes, we do share some similarities, but like we are different. And I missed that. I missed that so much about growing up in a Korean household. I missed the fact that I never asked my adopted mom if we could try to cook something Taiwanese, if we could just cook like a Taiwanese food, because she was always making like Korean food. And I'm not gonna lie, like my mom is an amazing chef. Like to this day, I can't go to get Korean barbecue without comparing it to my mom's cooking, because she cooks it so much better than any restaurant can. Like we went to LA one time, we were in K-Town, and everybody was like, you've got to go to this Korean barbecue place. It is the best in town. My husband and I, we go there, and we were both like, dude, mom literally cooks way better. Like we had leftovers of hers that are better than this. Like, are you kidding me? Like, so I'm super grateful. Don't get me wrong. I'm super grateful for like the Korean food that my mom cooked for us, but it's not the same. And so now that I live by myself, I'm exploring Taiwanese food, and it's been so rewarding. Like, you know how smells awaken the deepest memories within you? I bought a Taiwanese cookbook, and I made something called 3-cup chicken. And just the smell of the ginger and the garlic and the oil. It was me walking on the streets of Taiwan all over again. Like I remember that smell vividly. Like just mix in a little bit of like car exhaust, and that's literally what Taiwan smelled like. Like so much of my childhood, my young years was wandering the streets of Taiwan, and it took me back to like before all of this trauma, like before I had any idea just how much heartache was in store for me. Like it took me back to that simple time, and it was incredible. So yeah, like it's been very rewarding and healing and fulfilling for me to reclaim that part of me, because like I want it back.
Well, and many of the stories include some aspect of food, and I love that. Thank you for sharing that. We, like I said, we're going to hear from some of the other authors, and they'll talk a little bit about their work. But I absolutely recommend that folks pick up When We Become Ours. But what do you want to recommend to us today?
I want to share some TikTokers that I love to follow because their content makes me feel so seen. So the first one is adoptee_thoughts. So this creator, she's been sharing a lot about her reunification journey, meeting her bio mom, and on top of that, just being an adoptee educator. And she's also written some books about adoption as well. And
that's Melissa, right? Melissa Guida
yes.
Richards. Yeah, she's been on the show before. We love her.
That's so wild, so cool. And like, yeah, we follow each other. I love her content. She doesn't hold back. Like she says it as it is. And that's what I love about it, because like, I feel like when you have to deal with so many people who still fall for, I guess, I don't know if I'm saying this like right, but it feels like the adoptee propaganda when they're still like, oh, like, why can't you just be happier? Why do you have to make your life so much about trauma? When you have to deal with all of that constantly on the internet, like it kind of gets annoying, gets redundant. And I love that Melissa is so strong. Like she's an incredible person.
She's very patient, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah. She's patient with the nonsense.
Yes. I absolutely love that about her. Another TikToker that I absolutely love, it's at first.birth.mom. I love a lot of her content as well, because I feel like we relate to each other so much, not only about the adoption trauma stuff, but about like growing up Mormon how Mormonism overlaps with the adoption narrative, really encapsulating the grief of missing, the longing, something that adoptees really share. And I love what she does for the community in just being vulnerable and expressing herself. The last one that I wanted to share, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but it's a Uena Emily, EUNAEEMILY. She's a Korean adoptee, and she makes Korean cuisine. And she does like these voiceovers while she's making Korean food, and she talks about her experiences growing up as an adoptee. What I love most about her content is it's so empowering. Anybody can start cooking. Anybody can start like feeling that void of that cultural connection, like reclaiming that cultural connection through food. And that's what she does, is she cooks and she shares her adoptee stories, her adoptee experiences. And like not only is the food porn like to die for, but the stories too. The stories, they hit home. She's so vulnerable, so raw, so unapologetic. And I love that. I love that about when adoptees share our stories, like we don't hold back. I see the courage in their words. Like it's never said outright, but it's said in every other way: body language, tone of voice, the way that like the words are paired together. Like there's so much strength. It takes so much strength to have to be able to share this experience, because I feel like sometimes like I to this day sometimes get like, anxious sharing my adoptee experiences, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to maybe cause more harm for people who might still be in that sort of like internalized adoptee trauma headspace. Like at the same time though, I've lived my entire life catering to that narrative. And like, when am I going to finally, like, when are we going to become ours? Damn it. Or darn it.
That's a great place to end. Amazing. Well, the way you described some of those creators, Stefany, is what I see in you. Super authentic, vulnerable, saying some things out loud that maybe other people haven't had the courage to share yet. And you're sort of helping open the door for that. So speaking of that, where can we connect with you online?
Yeah, so I am at Books by Stefany, Stefany, across all platforms.
Wonderful. Folks need to make sure they're following you there so they can check out your debut, First Love Language. And I've seen so many people thrilled about that romance coming up.
Yay, thank you.
Yes, so exciting. Thank you so much for sharing some of your story with us, Stefany, and for celebrating the book launch.
Woo, I know. God, so excited. Man, like I just keep thinking about like me, if I was a kid, like if somebody else, even if just one classmate had said like, man, I really miss my biological family. Or like if just a classmate was like, yeah, I'm adopted too. It would have been a game changer for me. Game changer. But like, it's so mind boggling that like, it's such a hard topic to discuss. And I'm so glad that like, not only is this anthology coming out, but there's this whole movement, whole wave of stories coming out. And like, I want to make discussing adoptee trauma mainstream. Like I want people to know the nuances, man. Like very excited about that.
Yes. And I'll spend one moment honoring our forerunners, just talking with someone who read one of the first adoptee memoirs in the mid 1970s. So we are, we're standing on generationally. We are not the first.
Absolutely. It's domino effect, man. Mm-hmm. Seriously.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
We are going to hear from several authors who have pieces in When We Become Ours. and I will make sure to link to everyone in the show notes so you can connect and follow their work. I asked them a few questions, and we're going to start with, what would you say to your younger adopted self that you needed to hear? This is Lisa Ulam Schoblom, who is also the author of the graphic memoir Palimpsest.
Dear Ulim, yes, Ulim, this is how your name is supposed to be pronounced. It's soft, beautiful, and poetic, and means forest echo. They pronounce it in Sweden incorrectly, and I understand why you resent it. Also, I want you to know that you were never abandoned. Don't believe what people are telling you about why you ended up being adopted. Your mother loved you and wanted to keep you, but she wasn't allowed and lost you as much as you lost her. She's thinking about you every day and has not forgotten you.
Hi, everyone. This is Mariama J. Lockington. I'm an adoptee, an educator, and author of books for tweens and teens, and I am so honored to be a contributor to When We Become Ours. Something I would want to tell my younger adoptee self today is simply just to tell her that she is enough, that all of the isolation and loneliness and feelings of otherness that she is feeling are valid, alongside all of her joy and curiosity and dreams, and that she's not alone, that one day she will find people who see and hear and love her for all of her nuances and complexities.
What would it have meant to you to have a resource like this when you were a teen?
Hello, my name is Kelly Baker, and I wrote a story called Deadwood for When We Become Ours. I would have really appreciated a book like this when I was growing up to help validate and normalize my experience as an adoptee. I think grown-ups tend to simplify adoption for children, but in reality, adoption is very complex and nuanced. I wish my younger self knew that it's okay to have complicated, difficult, or even surprising feelings about adoption, and you deserve to feel seen and supported to process those emotions. Community has been an important part of my journey towards healing, so I'd love to connect. You can find me on Instagram at Kelly D. Baker.
It would have meant the world to me to find a book like When We Become Ours on bookshelves. I was an avid reader as a kid, and I was constantly searching for books with characters that were like me, with transracially adopted Black girls or Black characters, and families that were multiracial, and I didn't find those books growing up. So one of the reasons I write the type of books I write for young people, centering adoptee characters, is because I'm writing into this void from my own childhood in the 80s and 90s. And this book is just going to be so life affirming, even to me now as an adult. I haven't had the opportunity to read many of the other stories in the anthology yet. So when I get my hands on this final copy, I'm honestly going to, make some tea, put on a cozy sweatshirt, get under a blanket, and just relish in the opportunity to read, numerous stories that center people who are like me in some way, even if we come from different contexts, that center the adoptee experiences, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And I just know that it's just going to be such like a soul affirming moment, even for me now as an adult reading this book.
Hey everyone, my name's Eric Smith. I'm one of the contributors to When We Become Ours. I cannot stress enough how much a book like this would have meant to me as a kid. I grew up, and what I'm about to talk about probably means nothing if you're not a big video game nerd like me. But I grew up with video games like Final Fantasy III and Chrono Trigger and Secret of Mana and all these golden age of Super Nintendo role-playing games where you had protagonists who were the forgotten adopted kid or the orphan or the foster youth who somehow has magical powers and saves the day and saves the world. And while that might sound great, like, oh wow, cool, you're people you looked up to were superheroes, it's also not great because, I didn't have magic when I was a kid. I didn't have a giant sword that solved all my problems. So having a book that had, real stories from real people that could answer real questions would have been so helpful, because then I would have had the language I needed to communicate what I was feeling. Those video games didn't give me that language. They gave me an escape, and I needed to face what was going on. And a book like this would have really helped out a lot.
I want to say that I would have loved it, but when I was a teen, I was so busy fitting in, dreaming of waking up white and hating myself for being Asian. I still didn't understand how adoption had impacted me and that I could draw strength from other adopted people. So I'm not sure there would have been room for me to appreciate this book then. But the more positive me would like to believe that reading a book like this, with voices mirroring my own experiences, would have been of great comfort to me. This book could have been the first step for me to stop internalizing racism, and maybe it would have shortened the length of time I spent denying my own adoption experience.
How does it feel to be a part of this growing chorus of adoptee authors?
Hi, my name is Lisa, and I wrote the story Glide for the anthology. I'm so happy and grateful to be a part of this collection of stories. The only story that I ever grew up reading when I was a teenager, young adult about adoption was a Chicken Soup for the Soul story. And it was about a girl who was adopted and everything was tied up in a bow at the end. And it was like the typical grateful adoptee narrative. It kind of was my paradigm and framework growing up as to what my adoption experience should have been like, because that's all I knew. And so I'm so happy to be able to be a part of this anthology where, there's just so many more shades of gray. I think in our culture, there's just a lot of black and white and dichotomous kind of thinking where there's a good guy and the bad guy. And I have two small children, they're 4 and 6. And even in the shows that they watch about learning their ABCs, there's good guys and there's villains. And I think we just kind of see life through this framework in our society. And so yeah, I just think that it's so easy to stick adoption into that framework where there are good guys and bad guys, and that's how it's so often portrayed. But, I think there's more and more people who are embracing the gray areas and just saying that, it's okay to have complicated feelings. It's such a complex situation to be in, and we can hold the struggle and the pain and the loss and the grief and the questions of identity and belonging together with joy and gratitude. And we can, struggle with so many things, and that's okay. And it's not only okay, it's normal. And we just have such complex lives. And yeah, so I think it's really empowering to be a part of this anthology. And that's why I like the anthology approach so much, is that it's a whole bunch of different stories and everyone's is so unique and so different. And everyone, has different losses and different struggles. But at the end of it, there's this implicit invitation to, share your own story, and that the reader can just add their own story with the honesty and with the self-compassion and self-love that they deserve.
I'm so honored to be included in this anthology with all these great authors. It gives me hope to see more and more of us putting pen to paper to communicate our experiences of grief, loss, trauma, racism, and forced migration in a world where adoption narratives are still mainly written by non-adopted people and still favor the adoption industry over family preservation. When other people speak for us, we tend to be reduced to passive objects whose sole purpose is to be rescued, feared, or fetishized. But when we get to speak in our own voices, we reclaim our humanity and show the world we are people of flesh and blood.
Being a part of this growing roster of adoptee authors now as a grown adult, I can't even tell you how much that means to me. I mean, I keep saying I can't even tell you, but I guess I'm going to right now. But, I didn't have any adopted friends as a kid. They weren't around, or if they were around, I just didn't know them, or they didn't talk about it. And now finally having all these friends and all these colleagues who know what I'm feeling like about these very specific things that are hard to explain and define with people who aren't, it just means a lot. And it means so much to me to know that we're writing this work that's going to mean a bunch to kids like us who needed it so badly.
So in short, it feels great to be a part of this anthology and exciting. And I'm so honored to be part of this cohort of colleagues who are writing stories and sharing their truths, even if it's through fiction on the page in this way. So I've been screaming about this book from the rooftops already at every event I've done. I've been like, this book is coming out, pre-order it, write it down. And that won't end once it comes out. I'll be screaming about this book for a long time because I think it's really pivotal. It's a pivotal moment.
Tell us a little bit about the piece you've written in the anthology. What can we expect? What are the themes you're hoping to share more about?
As far as I know, I'm the only one who's contributed with a comic rather than written prose. So there are two versions of my story, one for the printed book and one for the audio. I hope my story communicates some of the painful loneliness many adopted people experience throughout their lives. We may be surrounded by people trying to love us, but non-adopted people can't possibly understand what we go through. Adopted people are often told that we've been given everything, that we're lucky and have been saved from terrible circumstances, so what more could we possibly need? But many of us feel a deep hole in our beings that can only be understood by other adopted people who've gone through the same thing. So, my story is also a celebration of adoptee friendships and solidarity.
My story is called Cora and Benji's Great Escape, and it is about a 16-year-old girl named Cora. She's Black, she's adopted. She's the oldest of 4 adopted siblings. Her parents are white, and when one weekend she and her family go to one of those adoption retreats or camps that sometimes adopted families go to meet with other families that look like them and learn, she is not excited to go to this camp. She's sort of outgrown it and doesn't understand what's in it for her. She only sees it as like, well, it's just our white parents who get to like talk about their racism, but the kids kind of don't do anything. But she is excited to go to the camp because it's an opportunity for her to see her best friend, Benji, who's another Black adopted girl like her. And the two of them really don't get to see each other very often. And when they do see each other, one thing that they like to do is share poetry with one another. Something that Cora doesn't share with anyone else in her life, only Benji. And so the two meet over this weekend. They're kind of rolling their eyes at everything that's happening, but they plan an escape for a couple hours. And I won't spoil it, but they plan some type of escape to get away from this camp and go experience what the larger world has to offer them once they're of age and out there as young adults. So I'm excited about it, and I hope folks enjoy it and it resonates in some capacity. I'm Mariama J. Lockington. You can find me on Twitter, as long as Twitter exists, at Mari Lock. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok at For Black Girls Like Me. And my website is mariamajlockington.com. Thank you so much, Haley, for featuring us in this pivotal moment, and to Shannon and Nicole for gathering all of us together to put together this wonderful book.
As for the piece that I wrote in the anthology, it's called Truffles. It's a cute story about a adoptee living on a farm with her family. She's transracially adopted, doesn't look like anyone around her, and really wrestles with every holiday. It's something similar to what I dealt with as a kid. And when she finds a puppy lost on her family's truffle farm, she decides to raise it alongside the family's truffle pigs in hopes that maybe this pup might find a family alongside the animals on the farm, and sort of parallels her experience of not quite fitting in with her own family. I'm hoping that the themes it touches on about, identity and family and transracial adoption really ring with people who feel the same way. As for where people can find me online, you look me up at Eric Smith Rocks. That's my website.com. I have a couple books out and about, including Jagged Little Pill, the novel, and the upcoming With or Without You. And thank you for having me on here to talk about this wonderful anthology. I'm just so happy to be a part of it.
I want to say a giant thank you to Stefany Valentine for sharing her story with us. Thank you to Kelly Baker, Mariama J. Lockington, Eric Smith, Lisa Ulam Schoblom, and Lisa Nopachai for contributing to this episode as well. A huge congratulations to Nicole Chung and Shannon Gibney for this marvelous collection. And I want to list the other authors for you as well. Some of them have been on the show before, and some might might be new to you: Mark Oshiro, Susan Harness, Matthew Salesis, Jenny Hyojun Wills, Sun Young Shin, Mamie Collier, Meredith Ireland. The book has a foreword by Rebecca Carroll and an afterword by J. Ron Kim. I'm sure some of you recognize a lot of those names. And I think as our community, it's really important to support this important work. So my apologies if I mispronounced anybody's names. I am so excited for this book to be in your hands very soon. And I was so honored to get an advanced copy and be able to share about this right before I came out. So thank you so much, and a huge congrats to all. Thanks for listening to Adoptees On and for supporting adoptee voices in this world. Let's talk again next Friday.